Yo, what's going on, guys? Patch 2.6.1 has been released on the PTR, and with it brings sweeping buffs to every single class in the game. Now, instead of going over the entire patch notes, we're just going to go over the Witch Doctor content for the time being because, well, that's what I know. Now, again, keep in mind this is the PTR, and there's a good chance that a lot of these things get changed. We'll probably see a decent amount of buffs and nerfs over the course of this PTR, because we do have a while before this patch will be going live. So first up, let's talk about the one single skill change for the Witch Doctor. And this is one that really pretty much affects every Witch Doctor build. And that's Soul Harvest. Adding a stack or refreshing Soul Harvest now refreshes all stacks of Soul Harvest. So this is a nice little quality of life change. And again, pretty much every Witch Doctor build runs some form of Soul Harvest. Whether it be Languish for more armor, paired with the Lacumbra Bracers and a Sacred Harvester, or if you're running a speed build, there's a good chance that you're running Soul to Waste for more movement speed. So really this just allows us to be able to keep 10 stacks of Soul Harvest up much easier. Let's get into my personal favorite buff for the Witch Doctor in this patch, and that's to the Jade Harvester set. In my opinion, Jade is the most fun spec to play for Witch Doctor. It's the most unique, and honestly it's one of the most unique builds for any class in this game. We'll get into the actual buffs, we'll talk about some different builds for Jade, and then talk about some things that I think Blizzard needs to still work on for the set during the course of this PTR. So the revamped 2-set bonus reads, when Haunt lands on an enemy already affected by Haunt, it instantly deals 480 seconds worth of Haunt damage, up from 120 seconds. So just a really nice single target damage increase for Rift Guardians and for champions and elites. The 6-set reads, Soul Harvest consumes your damage over time effects on enemies, instantly dealing 1200 seconds worth of remaining damage, up from 300. Pretty insane damage increase. I don't think Jade is going to be like the top pusher for solo G-Rifts or anything like that in its current state at least, but you should be able to push up pretty high if you want to. The limiting factor for the moment with Jade is just survivability. I'd like to see them add some kind of toughness or mitigation to the 4-piece bonus of Jade. I think that would go a long way. But with this damage increase, we should be able to drop some damage items to add some survivability to the build to push higher. Now currently my biggest issue with Jade on the PTR at the moment is just the interaction with Creeping Death and Jade Harvester. So Creeping Death basically allows your Haunt and your Locust Swarm to last 3600 seconds. Every Jade Harvester build runs the Quetzalcoatl Voodoo Mask, and that's because it effectively doubles your damage, but it also compresses the duration of Creeping Death by half, or 1800 seconds. And by just looking at the 6-piece bonus of Jade, that's going to consume 1200 seconds of that 1800 seconds of Creeping Death. Basically meaning that after every single Soul Harvest cast, you would have to reapply your dots to maximize your Soul Harvest. Now, not only would this be a very annoying playstyle, but it goes in direct contradiction to the 4-piece Jade bonus that basically says that every time that you Haunt or Locust Swarm, you reduce the cooldown of Soul Harvest by 1 second. That's really the playstyle of Jade. You're running, obviously, that 4-piece, along with Grave Injustice as a passive and some CDR on your gear, to at times be able to just spam Soul Harvest, or at the very least cast it very often. So I think the most obvious solution here is to just increase the duration of Creeping Death. And I'm kind of surprised that Blizzard didn't just implement that in the first PTR patch, but I think we'll see a solution to this at some point. Whether that's the solution or not, we'll see some sort of resolve to this issue. But at the moment, on the PTR, Jade is a little bit broken because of this. So a couple builds I'm looking forward to for Jade. The first one being the typical T13 Jade setup. Now, currently, one of the biggest issues with Jade and T13 is the ramp up time on damage, because you have to apply your dots and then blow them up with Soul Harvest. And that's just a good deal slower than any build that gets to just attack monsters and kill them right away. With this damage increase, I think what we'll be able to do is passively cast Locust Swarm with the Wormwood in the cube, and then just blow up the trash with just the Locust Swarm on the trash without ever casting Haunt on them. And that should increase the speed of Jade and T13 and low-level Greater Rifts a decent amount. And then I'm really looking forward to running Jade in speed 75 to 85 solo G-Rifts. I really like build diversity in that range of Greater Rifts, especially for solo play. I like to play solo a good bit, especially later on in a season when there's not as many players around to immediately group with, but you still get really good gem ups doing that. You get decent XP. It's not going to be anywhere near as good as running in a group, obviously, but it's still decent. And then a lot of legendaries too. So I like the fact that in this patch there's going to be a lot of build diversity in that range of Greater Rifts. Next, let's talk Fire Bats. Blizzard buffed two of the key pieces to Arakier Fire Bats builds. The first one being the Fire Bat's Staff. Fire Bats attacks 100% faster and costs 75% less mana, up from 70% less mana, as its damage increased by 150 to 200%. And then they also buffed the Bakuli Jungle Rap's belt. Fire Bats deals 250 to 300%, up from 150 to 200%, increased damage to enemies affected by Locust Swarm or Piranhas. So this is a pretty significant buff to the Arakier Fire Bats build. Technically it's a buff to the Helltooth Fire Bats build as well, but that just isn't quite as strong. The playstyle of the build is the same as before. You're going to haunt up enemies as well as put Locust Swarm on the enemies so you get the increased damage from the Ring of Emptiness that you're wearing in the cube. You're going to cast Hex every 15 seconds to get your damage mitigation and life regen, and then you're going to just Fire Bats down enemies. Next up, we have two pet items that were buffed by Blizzard, and this buff right here is going to bring the most impact to the class as a whole, I would think, as far as affecting multiple builds. So first off, we have the Mask of Jerem. Pets deal 150 to 200% increased damage, up from 75 to 100%. So 100% more damage on the Mask of Jerem to all pets. Then we have the Short Man's Finger. Gargantuan instead summons 3 smaller Gargantuans that have their damage increased by 500 to 650%. So there are multiple builds that this will impact. The one that probably first springs to mind is Helltooth, which we'll talk about the Helltooth changes here in just a minute as well. But you've got the Helltooth set. This will affect Zuni. Both Helltooth and Zuni should be able to push into the 100s with this. LON pet builds will be affected by this a good bit. And this should increase the speed of some T13 builds too. First off, Helltooth with Angry Chicken. Your main source of damage there is the Gargantuans. So they're going to get buffed by 2 different items now to deal even more damage. The Zunimasa Sage's Death Breath builds should be increased a good bit. Part of the issue with running that build is just a little bit slower than running other T13 builds, and while it still will be, getting a damage buff to that setup will make it a little bit more viable for just farming Death's Breaths. And then you've got the LON Walker build that I think can be brought back with this patch. It's still not going to be as strong as I would like it to be, but you can definitely get it to a point where it's doing sub 3 minute Greater Rift 60s and T13. And I like just having a lazy build to play. Sometimes I don't feel like mashing a bunch of buttons. I'd rather just walk around and farm Greater Rift keys, even if it's not the most efficient or fastest build. That's the gameplay that's up at the moment, so you guys can see it. I'm not going to show any Helltooth gameplay because at the moment, Helltooth is actually disabled on the PTR. But let's get into the changes to Helltooth. So basically what they did with the 2-piece bonus is they took away the 20% increased damage from your attacks for 10 seconds. And I don't know if you guys remember a lot of issues with lag with the Helltooth set, but there were a few seasons where it was really bad. And Blizzard is basically attributing that to this 20% increased damage is why it was lagging so bad and there were so many performance issues. Personally, I assumed it was the damage over time effect, but apparently it was this increased damage. So that's been taken away. And then they've upped the damage bonus on the 6-piece by 300%. It's up from 1400% to 1700%. So this paired with the changes to the Short Man's Finger and the Mask of Jerem basically means that the old Helltooth Gargantuan pet builds are back. And you should see them pushing extremely high in Greater Rifts. It's not really the most fun gameplay, in my opinion. I don't necessarily dislike the build, but it's not something that I would want to push with for an entire season. But the basic strategy of the gameplay is that all of your damage is coming from those 3 Gargantuans, and they cleave when they deal damage, so you want to position them in a way where you're able to maximize their AoE damage. And without being able to control them, that can be kind of difficult. What you tend to do is group up a bunch of mobs and then try to place them right in the middle of those mobs or leash them. And so they respawn where you're at as you run far away from where they're attacking currently and get them to attack the enemies that you want them to. Not always the easiest thing to do. And part of the issue with them is that they have a really long cooldown. Now with Grave Injustice and things like that, it's not as bad. You'll be able to recast them more often, but I think they should shorten the cooldown by a good bit, maybe by half. and it would make the gameplay much smoother, being able to really position where you want your damage. So with patch 2.6.1, if these changes were to go live the way they are currently, setting aside the mechanics of Jade, we should have multiple builds that can push up to Greater Rift 100. Jade Harvester, Helltooth Gargantuans, Arakir Firebats, Zuni Pets, and LON Spirit Barrage, and then possibly LON Pets as well. So I think this patch is bringing some of the best build diversity that we've seen for Diablo 3 in quite some time at the high-end solo level, and I think it's very good for the game. So anyways, guys, that'll about wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to comment on what builds you think will be the best or what you plan on playing in the next season, and I'll see you next time.